Hello and welcome back to Zilog and Moto, the YouTube channel where I apparently have no problem reviewing the same game multiple times. But seriously, if you're not familiar with the channel, my name is Dave, and a little over 4 years ago I decided to do something with this collection of 8 and 16-bit Sega games that I was building, and that was create a YouTube channel that did in-depth reviews of all of them. Because I didn't see the point in investing all the time and money in this collection to just let these things sit around. It just seems wasteful. So anyway, I did just that, and now I'm sitting just this close to having reviewed 200 of these 1,280 or so titles that I'm considering the collection, which consists of every English language title released for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X. And note, I said English language there, so that covers games released in both NTSC and PAL regions. And no, I do not currently own all 1,280 of those games yet, as evidenced by the fact that I've blown my schedule in the last few weeks and not reviewed Pac-Mania and Winter Olympics when I was originally supposed to, but it is a work in progress. One of the reasons why I don't have a copy of Winter Olympics yet is because, in this case, I'm specifically referring to the Master System version of the game, as I've already reviewed the Genesis version back in episode 97. And boy, that was a doozy. So this Master System version frightens me a bit. But I haven't skipped it because I'm afraid of it, even though I am. It's because it was originally a European-only release for the Master System, and I don't know if you've noticed or not, but Master System games aren't exactly too common in the United States these days, and doubly so for European releases. But you know what game I do have that is also a Master System European exclusive, and that I can actually review this week as a follow-up to a Genesis review that I did about 100 episodes ago? Well, that would be Rampart, the port of the Atari arcade machine originally released in the arcades in late 1990. Rampart, if you're familiar with it, is definitely one of the most unique games that I've played, not only in the almost 200 episodes of doing Zilog and Moto, but also just in general. The original arcade machine came in both 2 and 3 player variants, which I suppose isn't that weird, but the game also relies primarily on trackball controls. Now, let me ask you, when was the last time you saw an arcade machine that had not 1, not 2, but 3 trackballs? When I reviewed the Genesis version, I think the only other arcade machine that we could come up with like that was Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, aka Sonic the Hedgehog Arcade, the somewhat rare arcade machine that provided the inspiration for Sonic 3D Blast on home consoles. Rampart, however, was a bit easier to find back in the arcades, as it was actually released in the United States, and it became one of Atari's last big hits, resulting in ports hitting the market for almost every major platform that existed in 1992, including the NES, Super NES, Game Boy, Genesis, Master System, Amiga, Atari ST, and even the venerable Commodore 64. What was it about Rampart that made it such a big hit while being so unusual? And does the Master System version hold up in comparison to not only the arcade game, but to some of the ports of the game on other platforms? Well, we shall see, but first a look at the package of this somewhat late Master System release.
And this is my copy of Rampart for the Sega Master System. It appears to be in fantastic shape, with no discernible damage anywhere to the outer cover, no scuffs or surface scratches to the clear outer layer, and the hang tab is fully intact at the top of the case. Along with that, the inner cover is perfectly intact as well, with no sun bleaching, water damage, or edge wear, just a fantastic example of this release in general. There is one thing that stands out as a bit odd though, and that is, if you flip over to the back and take a look at where the barcode is supposed to be, it's covered up with a sticker that states that it's part of some sort of package. Seems like that maybe this copy was originally sold packaged with another Master System title as a combo deal to maybe get rid of excess stock. I thought about opening this up to see if I could potentially get rid of that sticker, but the rest of the package is in such good shape, I didn't want to risk messing it up. I suppose if I really wanted to have a copy without the sticker, I could go back to eBay and pick out another one, because even with it being a European exclusive, it still regularly sells for as little as $10. But that just seems silly. It's just a barcode after all, and this is not Sonic the Hedgehog. As far as the front cover goes, with this being a late 1992, early 93 release, Tengen was able to apply their own style to the front cover and come up with something that was not only similar to the Genesis cover, but also versions of the game for other platforms, with artwork that came directly from the side art of the arcade machine. Also, it should be pointed out that the Master System cover actually has the proper version of the arcade artwork, with the soldier pointing to the right, versus the inverted version that the Genesis, and only the Genesis, got. I like this artwork a lot. The soldier's face conveys so much emotion about what's going on while pointing to the explosions in the background, and it's so incredibly detailed. Just look at all the small notches in the chainmail or the cracks in the stonework on the wall. And while I don't necessarily dislike Jellicoe's reimagined artwork for the NES version, I just really prefer having the original faithful to the arcade machine art. Before I flip over to the back, I have to mention this. Take a look at the spine. There's absolutely no mistaking what this game is if you see it across the room, with Rampart in big blood red block letters, in another improvement over the Genesis version with its ugly yellow text. While those Genesis releases stand out on the shelf as well, it's not necessarily in a good way. Now onto the back, and well, I hope you've got your reading glasses handy. Tengen made the decision to support not just 6 but 8 languages, and at the same time also decided to have 4 screenshots over to the left. Now, normally I love to see that many screenshots on the back of a Master System title, but unfortunately in this case, it basically blocks off the left side of the page, and the pictures aren't even that great, as the camera used clearly wasn't centered properly. This forced all the flavor text over to the right, and I'm not afraid to admit I've got to have the box about 6 inches from my face to be able to read this. Let's move on to looking at the manual and the cartridge. The cartridge has that unusual white label later third-party releases got, if you've never seen that before, and the manual feels a bit thin. Now, granted, Rampart isn't the most complicated game in the world, especially with it being an arcade port, and I suppose it does explain the game, but it just feels a bit skimpy, especially when you take the 8-language piece into consideration, and the fact that they managed to get advertising in for their other games. Okay, well, that's the package for Rampart. Let's get to the game and blow some stuff up. I mentioned earlier that I previously reviewed the Genesis version of Rampart on the channel, and until playing the Master System version this week, that stood as the only time that I've ever played any version of the game. I've never played the arcade version, despite it being nearby at Galloping Ghost, and before playing the Genesis version, I really had no idea what I should expect from the game, or even what genre the game was. Doing that review was truly eye-opening, because there was absolutely no way I could have predicted what Rampart was like, due to it simply not being like any other game that I've ever played or seen. The reason for that is because Rampart consists of equal portions of action, strategy, and Tetris? Yeah, you can't play Rampart without seeing the clear influence of the legendary puzzle game, which, not at all coincidentally, was the center of controversy between Nintendo and Atari/Tengen the year before Rampart was released in the arcades, and of course later on between Nintendo and Sega as well. The game almost feels like it was designed with very much a FU to Nintendo in mind, with Atari saying, well, fine, we're going to create our own version of Tetris then, with blackjack and hookers, before coming to their senses and deciding that it was easier to sell blowing things up to kids. The Master System version can be played in 1 or 2 player mode, and those 2 modes of the game are distinct, so I'll start out by talking about the single player version. In this mode, the game has 7 distinct levels for you to play through, with you taking on the computer in an effort to defend your kingdom from the attacking hordes. You start out picking from one of 2 levels, either an easier introductory level or a level that's slightly more difficult to defend, but worth a point bonus if you're successful. Regardless of which level you pick, you're presented a map of land that is grid-based, and somewhere in the map are 3 fortresses, and you are then prompted to pick one of the 3 fortresses to start the game with. When you pick your fortress, a wall is automatically built around the fortress, saving you the trouble of what would normally you would have to do during the first phase of your turn, and then the game moves to the second phase, which is placing your cannons. Cannons are crucial to your survival, and each round of play you're allowed a certain amount of cannons to place on the map, depending on the difficulty level that you're playing it. However, there's a catch. You can't just place cannons anywhere on the map. They must be placed within the walls that are surrounding your fortress, and each cannon requires a 2x2 grid of land to place the cannon on. To start out with, the walls around your fortress will be built giving you enough space for up to 4 cannons to be placed. That is, assuming you don't do something stupid like waste space that you're given and place the cannons in such a way that there's not enough room for all of them. Once you've placed your available cannons, or you've run out of space, it's time for the action to come in, with the third phase of the turn, and it's time to defend your fortress. From what, you might ask? Well, in single-player mode, that would be the vast armada of ships that the computer has. Each of the 7 levels in the game features a body of water, and the computer has decided that it's going to sail right up to the shore while firing its own cannons at you from its fleet. The ships will be aiming to destroy the walls surrounding your fortress, and it's up to you to try to destroy the ships before your walls are turned into Swiss cheese. Invariably, you're going to take some damage, even when playing on easy. It's just the nature of the game. The computer is always going to be attacking with at least 4 ships. The ships will take a few hits to be destroyed, and the ships tend to move around a little bit while attacking, requiring you to try to anticipate where they're going to be, or else you're probably just going to be annoying whatever marine wildlife happens to reside in that area of the map. Oh, and your cannon operators have a tendency to admire their shots, even the ones that sail harmlessly into the ocean, meaning that each of your cannons can only have 1 shot in the air at a time, making it even more important for you to be accurate with your shooting. Once the battle phase is over, you're given a set amount of time, 20 seconds in the normal difficulty, to assess the damage and try to prepare for the next onslaught. If the enemy has knocked holes in your walls via cannon fire, you have to build new ones to make sure your fortress is completely surrounded, or else you lose the game and have to use a continue, if you have one. This is where the Tetris piece comes in, and there's simply no way to play this phase of the game and not see the Tetris influence. The computer will give you pieces of wall in various shapes, some of which you're sure to have seen before if you've played Tetris, and it's up to you to try to fit them together to complete your walls in a mad dash to beat the clock. The first time I played the Genesis version of the game, I was more than a bit taken aback by this, as it seemed like a clear ripoff, but the more I played the game, I appreciated how they took the idea of Tetris and then turned it into its own thing. Part of that is due to the fact that you're kind of doing the opposite of what you do in Tetris. In Tetris, you're trying to fit all the pieces together in such a way that all the pieces fit together in the smallest area possible, and remove them from the board. In Rampart, you want the pieces on the board, and instead you're trying to determine how to make them connect with one another, while navigating both the physical blockers to the level of the shore and the back walls, and potentially special fiery cannonballs from red ships that prevent you from building on certain spots for a few levels. Also, good players won't always be purely on the defensive when placing walls. You might be putting up walls out to protect from land attackers that have been dropped off from ships, or trying to protect one of the other fortresses on the map, in turn to give you a backup if the wall from your first fortress is unsalvageable, or give you more places to place new cannons to better fend off the computer. The game is easy to pick up as you rotate through the 3 game phases, which is part of why the manual is as thin as it is. There's just really not that much to explain about build wall and blast away. You'll learn strategies as you go, for instance, which fortresses are bad choices to start out with, because of where they are on the map, making them hard to defend, and how to try to speed through the wall pieces during the build phase to get as much wall built during a turn, while still making sure you have enough to fully encircle your fortress, in a delicate balancing act. And players that are skilled at Tetris will probably have an advantage once they learn the ropes. Along with the single-player mode, the Master System version of the game also does have a 2-player mode, which I have to mention even though I didn't record any footage of it. In 2-player mode, players will each control their own area of the map, and the goal is similar to single-player mode, as each player is tasked with making sure they keep a wall around their fortress, and if they're unable to keep their wall up while the other player stays fortified, they lose the match. It's an interesting spin on the game, and it's definitely a nice feature to have for when you get tired of trying to defend against the computer and its oftentimes unfair amounts of fiery cannonballs. From a graphics perspective, Rampart isn't much to look at. However, part of the blame for that goes back to the original arcade game, which was never a stunner, as Atari focused more on gameplay than presentation in this case. As far as the Master System version goes, I think it does a good job of replicating the look of the arcade game, while definitely losing a bit of fine detail, as to be expected in the conversion down to an 8-bit machine. Could it have been better? Yeah, probably, but at least when you look at it, your reaction is probably, yeah, that's Rampart. I say this because of the existence of the NES version of the game, which, as mentioned earlier, was licensed through Jaleco rather than being handled by Tengen, probably due to the same issues between Nintendo and Tengen that I mentioned earlier. The NES version is more of a case where it looks kinda like Rampart if you close one eye and squint. It's not bad, and actually substitutes faster-paced action in the combat sequences in an attempt to make up for the lower quality looks of the port. Your mileage may vary, but I think I prefer the Master System version's looks, even though there's times when there's tons of cannonballs in the air, you can kind of feel a slight bit of slowdown take place. The sound, on the other hand, well, it's not good. In fact, it's downright bad, and might be the most afterthoughty sound production I've heard in a game the entire time that I've done the channel. I'd really have to look through the list of games that I've reviewed to try to think of a game with worse sound than this, but right now, nothing comes to mind. The best way to describe the sound is, it sounds like you're playing an ancient DOS game from the 80s that was only configured to produce sound via the PC speaker. But ironically, not the DOS version of Rampart, which was taken on by Electronic Arts and is an almost perfect arcade conversion. The Master System version is simply that bad when it comes to audio. The game features no music other than a few second fanfare when you complete a border wall, and I was questioning whether my soundbar on the TV was even functioning, that there's so little going on. In this regard, the NES version stomps the Master System version, as it manages to still retain the speech sound effects that start and end the combat round, along with the background music during the build phase. I'm not really sure what Tengen was thinking here. It almost seems like perhaps the audio that was included was just a placeholder audio, and then they ran out of time and decided to just ship it as is? It's very strange. From a controls perspective, the game controls pretty much how you would expect. And as a nice additional feature, you can hold down the button not used for shooting to move the cursor around faster than normal for when you really need to attack targets that aren't close together. I think my one complaint about the controls is actually similar to an issue I had with the Genesis version, and that is that moving the wall pieces around didn't feel precise, which is a problem when you're not only up against a time limit, but also if you drop even one piece in the wrong spot, depending on how it's shaped, you might not be able to recover from it. It's not the end of the world, and the game is certainly playable as is, but it would have been nice that had it been tightened up a little bit. Overall, Rampart on the Master System is a bit on the disappointing side. I mean, yeah, it plays and looks like Rampart, and it does feature the nice alternate 2-player mode, but it's impossible to play the game and not think that it was produced on the cheap. For a Master System title that was released in almost 1993, this game should have been much higher quality than it was, and I think it's somewhat telling that Brazil, the land of the Master System, was like, nah, we're good, you can keep that one over there. As a result, I'm giving Rampart for the Master System only 1 star, and that might sound overly harsh, so let me give you a caveat. If you'll be playing a lot of the 2-player mode of the game, go ahead and bump that up to 2 stars. But if you're primarily a solo player, I'd strongly recommend finding a better way to get your Rampart fix in.
Okay, and that was Rampart for the Master System. I've got to be honest, I really think that Atari Tengen was their own worst enemy sometimes. Granted, there's an absolute litany of reasons why Atari eventually failed completely and was just on a slow path to destruction ever since 1983, but releasing ports of their hit arcade games on the cheap like Rampart was on the Master System just did not do themselves any favors whatsoever. Rampart is not an overly complex game, and if Tengen had created the Master System version as a 4 megabit cartridge rather than a 2 megabit cartridge like the Genesis version, this could have been a much better game. But instead, they were out to make a profit however they could off the name recognition, and it shows. The worst part is I didn't hate my time playing the game like some other games that I've only given 1 star to. I just can't reward this level of cheapness. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's a game that I just got in from eBay, along with a copy of Miss Pac-Man that I didn't need. Oh well, maybe I'll keep it, trade it, who knows. Rather than doing what I did this week and reviewing the Genesis version of Rampart first, followed by the Master System version, This time I'll be doing that in reverse, as I previously reviewed the Master System version, and now it's time to take a look at the Genesis port. I don't exactly have high hopes for this one, as it's unfortunately another Tengen release, but you never know. Maybe I'll really like it, and they'll remember that the game actually needs sound. Stranger things have happened. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto, episode 197. If you like what you saw here and would like to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later!